Pray as though everything depends on God. Work as though everything depends on you. These famous words from St. Augustine summarise perfectly the life and mission of St. Mary of the Cross Mackillop, whose feast day we celebrated this weekend. According to their rule, the sisters of St. Joseph were on the one hand to depend on divine providence for their subsistence, and on the other hand go wherever they were needed and do all they could, never seeing an evil without trying to remedy it. Providence was to provide for their shelter, clothing, food and transport, while they, for their corresponding part, were to work tirelessly for the poor, fighting ignorance, poverty and injustice. In the life of Mary Mackillop, we see so powerfully the strong hand of divine providence, activated by her unfailing trust, but also by her ever-active human freedom, working with God to bring about what God was calling her and her sisters to do. In today's first reading, we have one of the many Old Testament examples of this interaction between divine providence and human freedom. In fact, divine providence and human freedom is another one of those both ends of Catholicism, on which I'll be presenting next Tuesday night down at the dungeon at 7 p.m. But back to the story. Unlike for the Israelites in the desert, in which God daily sent manna down to feed them, this time God didn't just send down scones from heaven to feed Elijah, the widow, and her son. But even for the Israelites in the desert, the provision of manna required some interaction of human freedom. The people had to daily go and collect the manna that God provided, taking not too little and not too much. If they didn't take enough, they'd be left hungry, and if they took too much, their disobedience and lack of trust resulted in rotting manna. And so they had to daily work for their manna provided by God. And so too the widow in today's first reading had to daily bake scones with flour and oil continually provided for by God. If we look at it closely, we can see that divine providence can come in two forms. The type that just happens every day out of God's generous love for all of his creation. It comes irrespective of our actions. The second type is invoked by our human freedom, and thus comes as a result of what we do and what we ask for. The type that typifies God's never-failing love for us happens every day, like the sun shining, rain falling from the sky, plants photosynthesizing, converting carbon dioxide into oxygen so that we may breathe. The other type of divine providence, as we saw it working for Mary Mackillop, needs faith and trust, demonstrated through fervent prayer in order for it to be activated. How many times were those entrusted to her care provided for by God through her intercession? Similarly, if the widow had not trusted in Elijah's intercession and do what seemed to be the impossible, there would not have been a steady supply of meal and oil for the three of them. Clearly, the lesson for us today is believe and trust. As Jesus says, set your hearts on his kingdom first and on his righteousness, and all these other things will be given you as well. In today's gospel, we probably have the strongest words from Jesus on trusting in the providence of God. But the realization of that providence requires that we direct our whole selves towards him and his most holy will for each and every one of us. Brothers and sisters, look at the birds in the sky. Are you not worth much more than they are? Yes, we are worth much more than the birds, but we must still work and pray. Jesus didn't promise that by simply trusting in God and following his ways, that life would be easy. The cross and sweat and tears is still very much part of our journey. And we know that from the story of Mary of the Cross, that each day had its own trials, work and troubles. It never stopped her though. She strove forward, even to the point of getting herself excommunicated. And even in her excommunication, she saw the providence of God working. We can see this in the words that she wrote to her mother after the excommunication was lifted. The cross is my portion. It is also my sweet rest and support. I could not be happy without my cross. I could not lay it down for all the world could give. With the cross I am happy, without it I would be lost. So, brothers and sisters, let us deny ourselves and, like Jesus says, take up our crosses. Let us put all our faith, hope and love and trust in the Lord. And like St. Augustine and St. Mary of the Cross Mackillop, let us pray as though everything depends on God, and let us work as if everything depends on us. Nothing is impossible to God. Let us not limit God's providential power through our lack of trust or hope.